The assignment file that you're going to need today is this one here called Anim1 Heavy Light 2020. So you can copy that file onto your machine somewhere that you can access it. Just don't open it up off of course materials because you won't be able to save there, of course. And then inside the week 3 folder, there's some stuff I want to go through, but we'll look at sort of the assignment and kind of look at sort of the planning part of this. So the bouncing ball that we did last week is very relevant to this. So everything we talked about last week is still high priority. Timing, spacing, arcs, right? Squash and stretch, all that stuff is incorporated to this. So the big difference here is animating 2 objects that have different mass, okay? We also want to keep the frame count a little bit low. So, hopefully 4.5, 5 seconds should be okay in around 100 frames-ish. And we have an example that you can have a look at. I've also got some readings if you want to go check out the Animator Survival Kit and check out the book and look at some of the pages there where they talk about weight and timing. And yeah, unfortunately it doesn't have the video embedded anymore because I got rid of the Flash plugin. And I've also got some reference. So the thing that I did a few years ago is I took one of the term 1 classes and I split everybody up into groups. And I gave every group a camera, a tripod, and a different kind of ball. And so they just started shooting reference, just so that you have an idea when you're sort of running out of ideas and just guessing at your desk. The easiest thing to do is just get some reference. So I put a whole bunch of different kinds of objects. So it's all different materials. There's foam balls, a baseball, anything that we could find that we could just roll off of here, right? It's like a basketball. And the idea for this assignment is you're going to pick one ball to be kind of just like we did last week. Just like a bouncing ball, a rubber ball, right? Think of it something like a soccer ball or a basketball. And then the other object, which you can see over here, is a bowling ball. So this is the one that you want to pay attention to. It's just looking at how this ball behaves compared to all the others. So the bowling ball, boom, right? So the bowling ball, if you frame by frame this, right? You can see what makes this very different is how much of an impact this has on the table, right? You can see the table buckle and the table actually bounces, okay? Now the bowling ball bounces up as well, right? So something that's heavy can bounce, but it decays very quickly. So if you think of like a bouncing ball, the pattern is almost like music or sound. If you drop a soccer ball, it usually goes thup, 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 but a bowling ball would like, right? So you hear a lot of little impacts in a short amount of time. So there's plenty of reference to look at. Now, I'm also going to just open up. There's a little PowerPoint here, which is just a summary of a lot of the settings that I always look for when I'm animating in Maya. So when I'm, before I start animating, again, a lot of this stuff we will do for you in term 1, but again, to term 2, you're probably already learning this in other classes about the importance of setting a project, sort of good file hygiene and management, keeping track of everything. Referencing, we're not looking at this term, but this is a summary of all the animation preferences that I usually go through. And again, they're in the recordings, but I also make sure every time I open up Maya on a new machine, I have to go and check all of these boxes. And it seems like a lot, but once you've done this a few times, it doesn't take very long to go to the settings and set everything up that you like in terms of what you want for animation preferences. So the most important thing, again, is making sure you're animating at the right speed. Make sure it's 24 frames per second. Make sure that you can see all the windows updating at the same time. Otherwise, it's really frustrating waiting for feedback. I like to make sure that my default tangents are the way that I like using incremental save. I like turning off things in the heads up display that I don't need, like polygon count or other stuff. And I make sure that I set my tab to animation. So all the animation tabs are ready, all the windows are there. And I also make sure that I have auto key on. Okay, and then I'm gonna go grab that heavy light there. Open it up. Okay, now I'm gonna expand this one. This is our shot camera. And down at the bottom, I can see that the 2D pan and zoom tool has been activated. Does anybody remember the keyboard shortcut to turn off that pan and zoom tool so we just have 100% view of our camera? It's not scaled up or down.
Slash.
That's right, the backslash. So you hit the backslash key, and then I can see here that it's just a shot camera. The other thing that you'll notice is this icon. This little icon right here is highlighted. You can also toggle that. That does the same as just tapping the backslash key. So this way I know I'm looking at just the shot camera and I'm not looking at a zoom view. I'm gonna hit 6 and I'm gonna turn on wireframe, no, sorry, not wireframe, fully shaded textured view, and I can still see my NURBS curves. There's still a few settings that I need to adjust. Up over here are the filters. I can turn those off and just have curves. So now I only have curve objects available to be selected. I'm just going to go out of my camera and go to a perspective view just to show everyone how we're going to set up this file. There's the camera. So that's the same direction the camera is looking at. And we have the two objects here. So what I'm going to do is grab one of them and just move them over to the other platform. The idea is that these two objects are not going to hit each other. They're not going to bounce and do anything crazy, right? We're just going to have them bounce as if they were perfect and could move in a straight line from one side of the screen to the other. It's up to you to convince Floor that these are heavy or light. So it doesn't matter which one you pick. She shouldn't have to ask you which one's heavy and which one's light. It should be obvious from the animation, okay? So if you want the little one to be the bowling ball, great. Just make sure that that one is the bowling ball. If you want something to feel heavy, it's a good idea not to squash and stretch it very much because most bowling balls are very inflexible. Now, what I'd recommend is when you're planning this out, let me just bounce back to the camera. I'm just going to use my grease pencil tool. I would start by, tackle one object at a time. And if I want this one, let's say this is going to be the rubber ball, right? So it's going to be just like what we did last week. The thing that's going to be a little different is I have to have a little bit of time here on the platform. So I need to figure out, well, how long is that going to be? I'm not sure, but I know I have to start somewhere. And this would be the point where I'm just going over the edge. And then I'm going to go and I'm going to go down here and I'm going to hit. Okay. And then it's just very similar. Maybe it'll go back up, right? Hit here, go up. I might hit the wall and then come back down and then, right? And then decay. What you want to avoid is I don't want anyone getting very inspired and then doing something like this. Because you're going to be here for hundreds and hundreds of frames. Okay, so there's no need to go crazy. We want to start with something just simple. This thing is just rolling. It's not being punched or shot out of a cannon, right? It's just rolling, hits the ground, bounces, and it might make it to the other side. And eventually what will happen is it will stop bouncing and it's going to roll. Okay. So that's going to be something that we didn't do in the last assignment. And this is something that most of us would probably rush. It usually takes objects a lot more time than we think to just fully come to rest on their own, right? It's something you observe, but you don't really pay attention to. But it will feel off if something just abruptly stops on its own. It just won't feel like how something organic does, right? Or just decays gradually. So the rubber ball is going to be very familiar territory. I would start with very similar timings and say, well, I don't know what frame this is. If I made a guess and said, like, this is frame 1, and then I gave myself, I don't know, 6 frames. This is frame 7 up here. Then I would still make a guess of, let's try half a second, right? 12 frames to fall. So if this is frame 7 plus 12, this would be 19. And I could do the same guess we did last week. I could try, well, maybe 8 frames up, 8 frames down, or 6 frames up, or 6 or 7. But I need to make a guess. And if I want to do 8 frames and put 8 here, what would that be? 19 plus 8 would be what? 27. But before I start doing all this arithmetic, do I want to do stretch, squash, and stretch? So I have to also think, oh yeah, all that stuff I got to block in. But I know like the main beat is going to be 19. And then I know 8 frames later, okay, 27, I'll be here. And then another 8 frames down, I'll be over here. And then that would be 35. And then from here to here, I don't know, 5 frames, 4 frames, make a guess. And then say, okay, then I'm going to be hitting here around frame 40. And then I have to worry about bouncing back. And I wouldn't try and draw everything on one piece of paper. I'd say, well, let's go from here and say, well, from 40 then how long is it going to take for me to fall and hit the ground? And okay, would that be maybe, sorry, that doesn't show up, 40? Would that be, you know, again, another 5 frames, 45? And then maybe this is going to be just 2 or 3 frames up and down. So maybe this would be, I don't know, 48, 3 frames up, 3 frames down. And then this would be 51 to hit the ground. These are going to be very short little bounces, but eventually they're going to come to a stop. And then I have to figure out, well, how long until I roll to a stop? And that again is going to be a big guess. I'm not going to worry about it right now, but I know I need this thing to roll to a stop. I know how long a second is. It's 24 frames. I could just, you know, for arithmetic's sake, instead of 20 frames, okay, 71, just to give myself a number that should come to a rest. For the big heavy ball, right, the bowling ball, it's going to behave very differently. Just turn off the onion skin. So this is, again, same problem, right? So if I place this somewhere, it has to start. Then it has to go this way to that last moment where it's just on the edge. Then it has to fall. And this one's going to have a lot less to do. Boom, 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 boom. Right, and then it's going to roll. So I can at least start with making my guesses. Like I know where my keys are going to be. It's got to hit the ground. It's got to go in the air. It's got to hit the ground, has to go in the air, all that stuff. And then it's just the timing. And again, I might borrow and say, let's just try 12 frames, right? And then this is going to be a lot less. So if this is 12, when this goes up and down, I want to make that a lot shorter because I want that to be a much shorter bounce. So I could cut this in half and say, well, let's try, you know, 6 frames up and 6 frames down. And then this one, I could cut it in half again, do 3 or 2 or 4, and just play with the numbers until I get something that goes boom, 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 right? It's the timing, boom, 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 right? Really, really short bounces. But for the bowling ball, I don't want to go crazy and have this thing go like boom, 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 boom. It's not going to feel like a bowling ball anymore. It'll just travel too far. So it's very similar to what we did last week. The big difference is it going to hit the wall and have to change direction and bounce back?